Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon, and we have two very beautiful guests with us today because they're good friends of Israel. And right to left is Jack Lauber. He's very active in the Americans for Friends for a Safe Israel. And we have Mr. Harold Sugar, who is, just I have in my hands, he's actually been noted in the American Veterans of Israel. He was one of the few Americans that actually fought in the 1948 War of Independence for Israel, went all the way over to Israel to help them fight. In any case, Harold and Jack, welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you.
Well, of course, you know, you've been on the show before and talking about Israel, but Israel's not stagnant. Her situation is never the same. There's always new ripples and new ideas that are come out in the World Forum or their own Middle East ideas, and therefore we have to call you back again and tune us up, so to speak, just like everything changes, so we have to understand new proposals, and people get confused, including myself. You hear these things, proposals, and I don't have the time to read 100 pages and, you know, legalistic documentation, so just to tune us in of what's really happening in the Middle East. If you want to take the ball from there and tell us what's happening.
Well, I don't think it's good. Omerat is clone of Sharon, and he's following this disengagement plan. The evacuation of the Jews from Gaza was a total disaster. Militarily, it went off, they evacuated the Jews, the settlers, they were not really settlers. They had been there for over a generation or more, several generations. But they took them out, and they put them in hotel rooms and all over. They are not being treated properly. It's a total disaster. And that was... now this is not... After all this time?
Yeah, even this time, because, all right, immediately is one thing.
Yes, but they
still
are
haven't done
not
anything
treated
with
very
them.
well, and they are not given compensation. It's been a horrible experience, and if the plan goes through to take the Jewish people out of Judah and Samaria, it'll be a total disaster. So I'm not positive about that.
I agree, and I was just reviewing some key issues here. Harold and I were on a mission to Israel several years ago. We visited the beautiful Jewish settlements, places like Neve Dekalim and others. We saw people who were really dedicated to Israel, living there, working there. They were uprooted. What's happened? Their homes, their beautiful homes, have been converted into Hamas training bases and launching pads for rocket attacks against Israel. I just noted that some of the key Israeli military commanders have sounded a very sharp warning. January 23rd, recent Chief of Staff Moshe Yalon declared the 67 borders are not defensible borders for Israel and are strategically damaging. The retreat from Gaza, he said in the magazine Azur, is interpreted by the Arabs as an Israeli breakdown to be exploited as a victory for the resistance. And he predicts that also with former Deputy Chief of Military Intelligence, Yaakov Amador, the abandonment of the high ground dominating Tel Aviv leaves the central stretch of Israel's coastal strip, where most of its population and industrial capacity is located, it completely exposed. So that we, not only in AFC, people in ZOA, other Christians, Zionists who support Israel, are opposed to this land for peace. It's just not going to work. When the Arabs talk about occupation, they're not talking about Gaza or Judea and Samaria. They're talking about Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. And there are many cases where appeasement is just going to fail.
Appeasement fails every time. Every time it fails. Now in Gaza, Ashkelon, we have vital facilities in Ashkelon. They're subject to rocket attacks. Gaza has become a major training base for Hamas, for every organization that wants to destroy Christians and Jews. The Muslims hate the Christians. We have World War IV. World War III was the Cold War. We have World War IV going on now. And the American people, Christians and Jews, don't realize it. We're in a very perilous situation. They're taking over Europe, the Muslims. There are 20 million in Europe. There's 6 million in France, 3 million in England, and 1 million in poor Holland, 16 million people. And they don't integrate. It's a very hazardous situation for Western civilization.
And also recently, in an interview with the Israeli paper Haaretz, the outgoing head of the National Security Council of Israel, Major General Giora Eiland, talked about the Gaza Strip disengagement as a missed opportunity of historic proportions, and warns that the convergence plan is not going to bring stability to the Middle East. You know, it's just going to be an incentive for war. And he claimed that if you want to have some type of Palestinian entity, then it has to be viable. Let Egypt give up part of the Sinai to increase the population of the populated areas of Gaza, and let Jordan give up some of eastern Jordan, you know, to house these people. But Israel has to retain control of the high ground.
And the water.
Right.
And
the water resources. That's very important. I think it was the Joint Chiefs of Staff in '74 that said that was so important. We cannot have missiles there on those mountaintops aimed at Israeli cities and Ben Gurion Airport. It would be a disaster.
Israel wants peace so much that it's willing to commit suicide for it.
Well, it's an unfortunate idea. It's just that they're really between a rock and a hard place.
If anyone in the world thinks that a sliver of land here or there will make a particle of difference, they have to have living on another planet. It won't help at all.
And we've got to really tell others that the history, those who don't learn from history are going to be doomed to repeat it, that Israel only has 20% of the historic lands of Palestine. Jordan is 80%. The British and the French carved up the Middle East, and Israel was just left with the remainder. So that we have a right to be there. These are historic lands. I just want to mention briefly that the very creditable former U.S. CIA intelligence chief, James Woolsey, recently said in the Wall Street Journal that the approach Israel is preparing to take in the West Bank was tried in Gaza and has failed utterly. The Israeli withdrawal of last year has produced the worst set of results imaginable. Heavy presence by Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, and some Iranian Revolutionary Guard units, street fighting between Hamas and Fatah, on and on. This cannot be repeated in any convergence plan or whatever. And he has summarized that 3 major Israeli efforts at accommodation over 13 years have not worked. The '93 handshake at the Rose Garden between Rabin and Arafat, produced the Second Intifada, and the Israeli withdrawal from southern Lebanon in 2000 just enhanced Hezbollah's presence. Now they have offensive rockets that can reach Tel Aviv on the border, and the withdrawal from Gaza has unleashed madness and terrorism. So this is based on the false premise that only Israeli concessions can displace Palestinian despair. This isn't wrong. It's not an issue, as Harold said, about land. It's an issue about Israel's very basic existence.
I'd just like to say that the chief of staff and the head of Mossad during Sharon's time were against the disengagement from evacuation or route from Gaza. They were thrown out. Even the new chief of staff, who was Sharon's favorite, you know, and now he is against. I'd like to just say one thing. If there's ever a Palestinian state on Judea and Samaria, the first war will be against Jordan, which is 75% Palestinian, and King Hussein is holding on by his fingernails. Then we will have a Jordanian state, Jordanian people against us, and they can combine with Iran. So it's a total hazardous situation.
That's incredible. I mean, it's just, well, you know, we're here to educate, you know, that's why on the Jewish issue, I don't know the public opinion are being sold a bill of goods, so to speak. You know, they hear the magic word peace, you know, and I was, well, you know, who's against peace? There's nobody against peace. Everybody wants peace. But, you know, you have to look at the bigger view in the world and, you know, just maybe you have peace for a month, a year, a few years. Obviously, you know, on a long-term peace, that's something that you can live with for children and grandchildren.
Yeah, during the Korean War and Vietnam War, the guys who did not want to serve, the left-wingers, went into the college. Now they are the head of the faculty in their department. They are hiring only left-wing professors who are giving our kids a false sense of what's going on. 90% of the professors vote Democratic. And the newspaper guys, the New York Times, Washington Post, the Los Angeles Herald, they're all left-wing papers. You never get the truth. The only one is from the Wall Street Journal.
And there's a few others, the New York Sun and a few other papers that are more balanced, Fox News. But the issue is that, you know, we have to realize that Hitler used the word self-determination for the German folks in the Sudeten Germans as an excuse to rape and carve up Czechoslovakia, and the Palestinians have missed every opportunity. I think Abba Ibn said it. You know, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They have had a chance of having a state of their own in 47, with the 47 partition plan, which they rejected. They went to war. There have been many opportunities for a meaningful peace, and they have been, unfortunately, under the control of Islamic fundamentalists who want Israel destroyed.
The basic concept of Palestine is that it does not have defined borders. Jordan has defined borders. The United States has defined borders. Palestine does not have a defined, the Arabs don't have a defined, and that's the basic concept of it, so that they could expand. That was the whole premise of the Palestinian idea.
And you know, many liberals want to help poor victims, and the Palestinians are playing the victimology card. Now, who made them victims? It wasn't Israel necessarily. When these about 750,000 Palestinians left or displaced by Israel's War of Independence, and most of them were told to leave so that the 5 Arab armies could sweep in and destroy Israel. Their leaders told them to leave. After the war was over, they were not allowed to be resettled by the Arab League and other Arabs. So they were put in terrible, filthy refugee camps, etc., etc.
You didn't mention that 900,000 Jews.
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Right.
I'm going to get to the fact that over 800,000 Jews were expelled from Arab lands. And I'll say this. I've seen the films. We've seen the documentary Silent Exodus. These people lost their homes, their jobs, their property in North Africa, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, wherever. They came to Israel. Many of them in the early 50s were living in tents in the Negev desert, and whole families living in tents with no running water and latrines. It was awful. Did any one of those over 800,000 Jews expelled from Arab lands ever commit a terrorist act against a local Arab? No. That isn't our way. You know, we don't believe in terrorism. Unfortunately, until terrorism is expunged from the radical Islamic mind, we're not going to ever have a hope of peace. And that's a reality.
Now, Oslo was allegedly reversible. Now, I blame Israel to a certain extent. That
What do you mean irreversible? What does that mean?
Reversible, if the Arabs did not live up to their agreement, then everything was off the table. In other words, there would be Arafat could not return, and he would have to be kicked out. So the Israelis, they hear Oslo, there were about 3 items that were so pertinent, that no terrorism, recognition of Israel, and no incitement. Well, none of them, they did not revoke the covenant. The incitement goes 24/7, TV, radio, and
Mosques.
and the mosque, horrible. And Israel knew all of this. They have Arabic-speaking people. They should have stopped the process and thrown them out. And instead, they went along, maybe we can get an agreement, maybe we can get if they ever do, it'd be like Chamberlain's agreement, you know, not worth the paper it's written on.
Good point.
Well, you know, it's an important point. I think that what you're bringing out is that people have to, you know, look at the real facts of the situation and not just look at the headline news and, you know, there's peace or there's agreements and what kind of agreements, what's behind the agreements. And, you know, and a lot of Jewish people, I mean, a lot of Israeli people are getting really hurt on the,
Yes.
you know, Judea, Samaria, which is commonly known as the West Bank, that they're being, you know, they're also being hurt. You know, you talk about, I mean, maybe Arabs or maybe or not, or let's even say it's true that they're having troubles, but, you know, there's Israelis are never able to have troubles or in the news. You know, they also have troubles like being bombed in their homes and in Ashkelon, in the main. You know, people want to live like a normal human being. So again, that side of the story is really told.
You know, I've written the Palestine Post and the Prime Minister how to stop these bombings, these homicide bombings. They are inaccurately called suicide bombings because homicide is killing somebody else. The way to stop it is if I commit a crime and my parents benefit, then they should implicated in it. Now, if little Mohammed blows himself up, his family benefits from it. I say to you, whack the mama and the papa. The Arabs have a very strong family group, and that will stop it immediately.
See, the real problem we have is there are many liberals, Jews, Christians, who feel sympathy when they see the pictures of the poor Palestinians and living in poverty, etc., etc. But what they don't realize is that Israel has tried to help these people. We saw the remnants of apartment buildings that Israel tried to build in Gaza years ago to improve their lives. They refused to live in there. They would have been accused as being collaborators. We saw industries that were set up by Israel in that Eretz industrial zone to employ Palestinians and to help them. And yet they still went with terrorism. And
before Oslo, there were 100,000 Palestinians working in Israel.
Right.
The economy is in shreds.
And the problem is that these liberals, are just seeing part of the picture, and they believe in, being kind. Well, kindness doesn't work with evil people. I think there's a statement in the Talmud somewhere that those who are kind to evil will be evil to the kind.
Right.
And this is what's happening. Terrorism is evil. We know that these people are being kept miserable, that whether it was Arafat's wife living on $50 million a year in a French hotel, or you see these villas for Palestinian chieftains with Mercedes outside, and the people are being kept miserable. The money is being squandered on weapons and terrorism, and the people are still suffering, even though billions are being given to the Palestinians by the U.S., Europe, etc. Now, we have a bone to pick with a few organizations like the International Solidarity Movement, misguided youth who have been corrupted by some of these leftist college professors, as Harold pointed out, and groups like B'Tzedek, Shalom, Jewish peace.
They take on peaceful names. We're for peace. We're for peace with Israel. But the aim is the opposite.
Right. And B'Tzedek for Shalom is a group that's been initially funded by Noam Chomsky and the Ford Foundation and others, and they have a lot of money that they use to try to buy out Jews from their homes in Judea and Samaria, and hopefully turn those over to the Palestinians in hopes of an illusory peace. It's wrong. It's wrong when we see on the internet that the International Solidarity Movement, who has assisted terrorists from Britain in blowing up Mike's Pub, for example, that's been tied to them, when they call this peace and justice group Jewish Friends of Israel, and Jewish Friends of Palestine, and that is it's completely absurd. People believe that they can cure problems by being kind, but if you're encouraging evil, it doesn't go away. It just gets stronger.
It's like the Communist Fronts organizations. It's a takeoff on them. They have peaceful names, but the opposite. But their intent is totally opposite.
Well, it's important that you come here and tell us the real, the other side of the coin, so to speak. That what's
you don't
happening.
get it generally. You don't get it from the news, from the media. The truth.
No, it's important. But what is your organization's trying to do in actuality to help?
Well, one of our important things is to get the truth out. We're also working with Christian groups like Bridges for Peace.
Give the name of your organization.
Yeah, well, AFSI, Americans for a Safe Israel, is working with Bridges for Peace to put on programs to counter this Palestinian propaganda, tell the truth. We have some interesting videos. I encourage the listeners to who have computers to get on the internet and listen to not only what Jews are saying in terms of support of Israel, but what Christians are saying as well. We have Bridget Gabriel, a valiant Lebanese woman who is a journalist. She has a website, ACT, American Congress for Truth. It's very important. We have Joseph Farah's WorldNet Daily. Groups like this are very important. They're very strong friends of Israel. And it's important that we work with them.
Christians are more positive towards Israel than a lot of Jews. Is a sad take on the situation.
And I want to put in a plug for a new forum. It's called the American Zionist Forum. It's on Yahoo. Just go to Yahoo Groups and put in American Zionists and join us for the latest news and commentary about Israel and the Mideast crisis.
The whole thing is the attack on Israel. Israel is only a weather vane for attack on Europe and the United States. And the first Saturday people, that's us, and then the Sunday people is the Christians. And the Christians don't realize it. I spoke to the Bishop Hubbard. I told him that churches were being destroyed in all of the Arab countries, and that, what was it, the Buddhist shrine in Afghanistan from the 2nd century, they're against all religions. And he said, yeah, he said the Catholic Church knows it, and they are, but how much can you do?
Well, it's unfortunate, but in any case, I'd like to conclude that some things that we can do over here is letting out the truth to people, and the more people know the truth, and I think find it abhorrent of, when it's a little bit different or a lot different than what they're hearing in the regular news stations. So that's what we're here for, to educate people, and just we ran out of time, but it was just maybe we'll come back maybe when there's a real peace. But in the meantime, there'll be some real news over here. Again, thank you, Jack Lauber and Harold Sugar, again for being on the Jewish View and to inform us the situation in Israel today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
It's a pleasure.
Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, and together we have Jack Lauber. And Jack is an environmental engineer, and even though he's retired from the state, he's still very, very active in the pollution problems in Israel and here in America. And yes, there are very big problems, and there we're going to talk about that. Jack, welcome to the Jewish View.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, listen, that maybe we should start, I don't know if you want to start with Israel or in America, but maybe right here at home, people think, the air is pretty good. I mean, it's the capital district, and, there's nothing that much at fault over here. There's not problems. What are the actual issues that you care about or you see as real problems around with pollution?
Well, one of the biggest issues is the fact that we're using archaic ways to get rid of our waste, our garbage. Even though we do limited recycling, a lot of our waste still goes into these landfills that leak and pollute. And I'm doing some research work at Columbia University, and we now know that some of these landfills are horrible. There's 46 toxic contaminants that have been identified coming out of landfills. Some of them can pose health risks.
Everything rots in there?
Yeah, well, not only that, but there are household chemicals that we throw away, cleaners and automotive products, and illicit hazardous waste also get into landfills. stuff that shouldn't be there that companies are throwing in, like dry cleaners and others on occasion. So these things just sort of cook and stew and form other chemicals, and they come out into the air.